Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Falcon and the Winter Soldier Season 1. I did review Episode 1 back when it, well, not aired, but when it was released on Disney Plus, and I intended on doing Episode 2. I didn't have time, and then I was going to come back and continue from Episode 3, but ultimately I didn't really feel like I had much to say, and what I did have to say for Episode 3 was fairly negative. So I kind of just retreated a little bit into a cave, and I did keep watching the show though, and I wasn't planning necessarily on doing like a season episode or review or wrap up or whatever, but I felt that now that I finished the whole season, the whole 6 episode show, I did have some things that I wanted to say. And I'm going to start with the positive because I am going to have some negatives. I am very mixed on this show overall. But there are some positives to be had, and the positives that I would give you straight up is Sam as Falcon. I think his journey and choice to be Captain America and take the shield is the most interesting arc of the show. It's the one that has the most weight behind it. It has, it's steeped in history. There's a lot of weight on his race playing a part in it, and does he feel like he should be a black Captain America? What does that mean to make that choice? And some of the characters around that choice I think are very interesting. Isaiah, this super soldier from the past who's been kind of swept under the rug. Sam is very upset. It was one of my favorite things about episode 2 was the introduction of Isaiah. And in episode 5, which is where I think the show kind of got back on track a little bit, some of my favorite stuff was their confrontation, and Isaiah basically saying that they'll never accept a black Captain America and he shouldn't want to be Captain America. And I thought it was wonderful that played into Sam's decision, even though ultimately he was going against that advice, and why he goes against that advice I thought was fascinating. The final episode that just came out today and I watched, I thought was mostly pretty solid, with probably the best scene of the entire show. And the best scene of the entire show is Sam making his speech on TV. It's not necessarily a planned speech by any means. He goes up to talk to the government leaders who are going to make the choices based on the borders of the countries which have been in flux because of the blip, because people disappeared and now they're back. I won't get into explaining all the details of the show. If you're here for this discussion, I'm going to assume you've seen it, and I'll just say full spoilers, and I'll trust that you understand what I'm talking about when I bring things up, because I don't want to be here all day explaining the backstory to everything. But this speech was wonderful. It was the only caveat, the only knock against it really is that I wish I cared more about Carly, who is the leader of the Flag Smashers, the villain. I wish I cared more about her. I'll talk about her more in the negatives when I get there, but I loved this speech for a number of reasons. I thought it was a very well thought out speech that kind of put on the table the morals in question, and I felt like the show at times was painting the Flag Smashers as too villainous given what they were, and obviously they were escalating to killing more people, so it was kind of hard not to see them as villains at a certain point, and I was actually disappointed with that because I thought it was less interesting. I thought actually having a real case, the villain has a real dispute and a reason for what they're doing is more interesting in this case. And Sam's speech here talking about, you just label them terrorists, you never stop to ask why, or the fact that there'll be more people who are inspired because you don't actually consider what they're trying to get through to you. You don't consider any of this. And he brings up being a black Captain America. He knows people will hate him for it, but it doesn't matter. He's going to do it anyway because it's important to do it. And there were several facets of this that I liked. One, and I won't get too political here, but in terms of my own views, I kind of loved the phrase that he boiled everything down to, because it's something I've actually said myself before, is that no matter what thing we're talking about, no matter what subject we're talking about, when it comes to my more liberal view on things, ultimately it boils down to what he says at the end of the speech, is that we can do better. So the speech spoke a lot to me personally, because I kind of fundamentally was just completely on board with what he was saying. But the reason why I think this works so well as a conclusion to his arc and a conclusion to his story in this show I don't necessarily think it had to cut to everyone. You know, his like Jonas brother looking like friend who we saw like early on this show. I don't know if we need to see his reaction to this speech, but Isaiah's reaction was important to me, and we had to see his reaction because one of the things we always talk about superheroes, especially when we talk about diverse superheroes, we talk about having black superheroes, female superheroes, and so on, is that we talk about how it's important that children of those groups have someone to look up to. They can see themselves being important, and that can be inspirational for them, as well as just the general equality that comes from that. Right? We talk, you know, that's brought up a lot when these subjects come up. I think I love that this obviously has that because we see multiple children in the show that are, you know, obviously look up to Sam and look up to Bucky and various things. But what this does that I think is kind of wonderful is that it also shows that someone else at the other end of the spectrum, that, you know, Isaiah, who is old and he's bitter and he's jaded and he has every right to be these things because of his past, because of how he was treated, to have him find a little bit of hope again and be a little inspired is incredibly uplifting. A, because he deserves to feel better, he deserves to feel those things, but because this is the beauty of superheroes and the beauty of what they can do. And I think anyone who critiques this as being too sentimental or being too on the nose, I think fundamentally doesn't understand what superheroes are supposed to be. What I felt from this speech from Falcon, from Captain America, I should say now, is that this is what I want to feel when Superman is doing things in a movie. And it's why I'm so upset that Zack Snyder's Superman is this emo, depressed-looking bastard every time he's around, because that's not the point. Superman's supposed to be the best of the best at doing this, which is making people feel included and making people feel that there's hope and to be inspired. And that's what I felt from this speech. So for any knocks I have against it because some of the elements leading up to it weren't perfect, this speech was fantastic. And him being very blatant and blunt about how he knows people feel about him and how he has to do it anyway, the points he brings up about actually understanding why these actions were being taken by these villains, and how it's easy to just label them that way rather than actually consider why are people feeling so passionate about this. You know, who are the people making these choices? Are they affected by this? And maybe for once you actually can sympathize with the struggle of someone who is oppressed or in a minority or whatever. All of this, I think, was beautiful stuff, and it was by far the big star that this show gets is that scene, and I will credit it greatly for that. And I think the action in the final episode is mostly pretty solid. It was fun seeing him use Red Wing, you know, making the woman on the hostage, like having her pilot the helicopter. All of that stuff I think was fun, and what really dawned on me as I get into kind of a negative here is how this really shouldn't have been a 6-episode TV show. This should have been a 2-hour movie. Because when I look at what I like in this show, and I'm not done with the positives either, because I also like the John Walker stuff for the most part, and I think that's an interesting character to look at, who also, by the end, has some sympathy because he makes the right choice. He throws down his fake shield, he chooses to save people rather than continue his path of revenge, which doesn't absolve him, it doesn't mean that he will never make a mistake again. He's clearly a character who can let his emotions get the better of him. He's clearly a character who can go to a darker side of his you know, ethics and mentality. But there is something there that's worth rooting for. That ultimately he will do the right thing in situations like this. And that makes him actually far more comparable to Bucky than it ever did Captain America. To Steve. They're so different, the two of them. So I really like that stuff too, for the most part. So those were the two key things. And I think those things, if you cut out the things I don't like in this, right, which is most of the Carly and Flag Smasher stuff, which I just thought was painfully boring. And I'm going to try and diagnose why I think that was boring in a minute, because ultimately I like the message that it's trying to build up. But I think there's some issues with it. But I don't like that. I hated everything with Zemo. Like, I hate it. Like, this was such a tangent. It did not need to be in this show. It just made the middle 2 episodes drag. It felt pointless. It felt like fan service. I didn't like that he was played mostly for comedy and has like a butler and a fancy jet, and he's treated as this kind of comic relief character. The kind of mundane spy stuff. The tone was all over the place, mixing the comedy with him with what they were actually doing. I couldn't give a shit about the power broker. I thought everything with Sharon Carter in this was pretty bad. I don't necessarily hate where it leaves her up, in the sense that I get that they're setting something up for future installments, future movies, TV shows, whatever. That's fine. But everything with her, I wasn't into. To the point where when they revealed that she was the power broker in this final episode, I went, oh yeah, that was a mystery I was supposed to care about. And I never did. I didn't give a shit about the power broker. I didn't give a shit about anything in Marjapur. You could have easily just connected them chasing a lead at the end of episode 2 to somewhere around the end of episode 4 and cut out almost 2 full episodes, and I don't think you would have lost anything of value. I thought those 2 episodes were tedious. I mean, obviously the ending of 4 with Walker, killing the guy is an interesting sequence, and there are some beats you need in there. But what occurred to me is that if you cut all that stuff out I don't like, you've basically got a movie in terms of runtime. Once you cut out all because there's like 8 minutes of credits on every episode, once you cut out those, you cut out the 2 episodes that I think are mostly just boring, you have like a movie. And it wouldn't solve every problem. We still have the problem of Carly and the Flag Smashers being really dull. I think that would be less offensive, and there'd be less time spent on their dull scenes in a 2-hour movie. You wouldn't do it as much, because I think the action and all the confrontation at the end is mostly solid. You even have like the action scene from Sam in episode 1 with Batrick, and that stuff is, it feels like an opening movie set piece. All the stuff in this last episode feel like the closing third act of a movie set piece, and it just feels like it was stretched out. And there's just this lull in the middle where all this Zemo stuff I could have just jettisoned into it. And I think it's kind of ironic, because I think Civil War is a middling Marvel movie, because it forces in all the fan service, like Civil War stuff, when the real drama of what's going on is the Zemo, Winter Soldier, Steve and Tony stuff, right? That core, like what Winter Soldier did in the past, is the real drama of the film. But we have to wait for it, because we have to go through all the fan service, say, oh, the heroes are fighting, and there's like almost no stakes. The irony for me here is that Zemo himself now in this feels like, oh, he's like a bigger star, he's a villain from a previous movie, he's a bit of fan service. We're just going to do stuff with him because people will eat it up, and I didn't think it served really much of a purpose. All things, I'm sure people may argue that it adds to Bucky's arc, or whatever. But I didn't care. I never cared. It felt like a mess every time it was going through that stuff. Particularly in episodes 3 and 4, I was just so out of it. But yeah, the big thing that I really want to talk about, though, or I want to try and diagnose, because like I say, there's the stuff that I really like, which is Sam's journey. I love the Isaiah stuff, and I mostly really like the John Walker stuff, and where it leaves him off. And in fact, actually, one of the comparisons I might make to something that I didn't like is Sharon Carter. Like, you need to set her up as being this new kind of shadier character who's doing a lot of sneaky stuff and is getting access back to, like, the US government and like fancy military tech and whatever else they're doing for the future. That's in the mid-credit scene. I feel like you could have just had like one scene of her early on establishing that she's around, and then have that mid-credit scene, and that would have been enough. You didn't really need almost anything else to really set up what she was doing. That one phone call at the end would have told you everything you kind of needed to know, that maybe we can't trust her, that maybe she's up to no good. I didn't really feel like her interactions with Falcon or Winter Soldier were all that good or interesting. I didn't need any of it. It was just kind of whatever. And I think the comparison I want to make here is to Juliet Louis-Dreyfus's character, right? Who was nice to see. I'm a fan of hers. I like Seinfeld, of course. She's a good actress. I haven't seen Veep. I've heard she's great in it. But that character has 2 scenes. She's introduced in episode 5, Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, who I'm not that familiar with the comics. But here's the thing, that's the beauty of it. Not knowing who she is from the comics, it didn't matter. Because the way the camera, the way the direction of the scene introduces her, it made her feel important. It teased that she is setting something up. She's trying to enlist Walker as an asset, as part of her team, whatever it may be. My gut instinct would be like either Thunderbolts or Dark Avengers or some alternate Avengers team. Which is nice that these shows are setting up something, that they're building to something that maybe will be a movie. And I think John Walker's John Walker. I think Wyatt Russell's a solid actor. Now, admittedly, he's always going to be under the shadow of his father because Kurt Russell has got the charisma of well, nothing. Like, I shouldn't be saying I shouldn't be saying that Kurt Russell has the charisma of something. Everyone else is compared to the charisma of Kurt Russell. That's how much charisma Kurt Russell has, and how much of a screen presence Kurt Russell has. So that's unfair to him. But but he is good. I liked him in Overlord when I saw him in that. I think he was solid in this, especially as it went on in the later portion of the show. But her introduction, Julia Louis Dreyfus, I can't say her name properly. When Elaine showed up, and she immediately felt important, and she had character, she felt like she was a big deal, and I was intrigued by who she was. And then they had one more scene with her in this finale where she gives kind of, Walker his new name, which is US Agent, which I think a lot of us were calling him from the start, just because we knew that's what he was. But you have this scene with her, and she kind of makes this little joke about, maybe I planned like all these events to happen, and to Walker's wife, I think, if I remember exactly what her relation was to him. And she's like, "Nah, I'm just kidding," or am I? Like, it was just enough that it was like, oh, she actually is quite interesting. And maybe this is just a good actor, but I think mostly it's not overdone. It's not like overly. We don't see her multiple times where we keep continually teasing that something might be up with her. It makes its point in two scenes. The first scene makes its point on its own, really. The second scene is just to kind of further it along and say that Walker is on board, he's got his new name, and it has a purpose, it serves its purpose. And this could have easily been another post-credit scene, honestly. I'm not even sure why it wasn't, really. Because, WandaVision had two. It had the one middle credit scene, had the end credit scene. I feel like you could have had this at the end of the credits, and it or if this was a movie, it could have been one of the credit scenes. It felt like it totally was in a lot of ways. So I just want to compare that, because I think when Sharon Carter shows up, like, it really sort of like does it really slowly, and it basks on her. She takes them back to her lair, and it's just a lot of explaining as to why she has so much money now. It was really funny because it was the same episode where Zemo suddenly had a fortune as well, and it felt like a kind of a retcon. And it's not so much that there's a problem that he always had money, it's more how it's played for laughs, and how he's just this suave guy with his big, I don't know, his big jet and coat and whatever. It felt tonally different to Zemo from before. And I'm not saying you can't evolve characters, but it felt very abrupt, so we could have something lighter in between everything else. And I don't think tonally that really worked for the show. I mean, all the comedy we ever need from this show was the chemistry with Sam and Bucky. And that stuff was endearing throughout. You weren't amending, you were avenging. That was a really good line in episode 5 when Sam's training and Bucky makes his choice. If anything, if I have a complaint about Bucky's arc, is that I almost wish we got the full scene of him telling the old man that he killed his son. Like, it kind of just we got like the bullet points and it cut away, and I kind of wish it let Sebastian Stan like give a monologue. I almost wanted, and maybe this is a bit unfair, but I almost wanted the Mike monologue from season 1 of Better Call Saul. And maybe that's asking a lot of an actor. Maybe Sebastian Stan, well, he's very capable, is not that. Maybe that's unfair, but that's almost what I wanted from that scene. But yeah, so the last thing I want to talk about really though is Carly, and I want to talk about why I think fundamentally, even though I like the points that she ultimately lets Sam make, they try to set up the themes where they have that conversation. I think it was episode 4 where he tries to talk her down and point out the hypocrisy, point out the path she's on. I think fundamentally the problem with the character, it's easy for me to say she's dull and she's boring, and one of the reasons why I get into analyzing movies and TV, and why I like analyzing writing and stories and the way movies are shot, is fundamentally I just want to be able to explain why I like something and why I don't like something, because there was a time when I couldn't. I would just like certain things and I would dislike certain things, and when people, and I'm not saying I'm still not guilty of it at certain points when I can't be bothered thinking about it or whatever, but people fundamentally, and I keep saying fundamentally, but when you do boil it down, you kind of get to this thing where you just say, oh, this was stupid, or this was good, or I really like this, or something. You have a lot of generic phrases for either liking or disliking something. And analysis and critique of art, effectively, is a way to try and actually diagnose, why do I connect to this material versus this material. And it's especially difficult when my response to something, which it was with Carly and the Flag Smashers, was these are really dull and bland. Now, I do think if this was shortened to a movie, this would be less of an issue. They'd still be kind of crappy villains, and it would just kind of follow the trope at this point that Marvel just has bad villains in their movies, with one or two exceptions. Which, by the way, I love Sam bringing up Thanos. He didn't name him, but the idea of like comparing the power that these people have to Thanos, I thought was an inspired touch. But anyway, so, but when I come to the conclusion that I just think something's really dull and I'm not invested, I'm bored, because first, something's so frustrating when I think something's great, when I think a movie or a TV show is great, and I hear someone say, "Oh, is it boring?" It's frustrating because it's like, well, give me something, because I think this is amazing, and I don't understand why you think it's boring, or why aren't you connecting with it? And maybe there's a reason, maybe there's not, maybe it's just bad taste, like that's possible. But it frustrates me when I say that, because I don't want to just say something is boring, but sometimes you just feel something is boring. And I try and pull up others, if Connor says something's boring, and he tries to make that his final point, I try to, at least I intend to, always call him out and say, well, no, why is it boring? Explain why it's boring. Because it's a really non-conclusion. It doesn't really say much other than how you ultimately felt. And I like to try and diagnose things. And the conclusion I've come to with Carly is that there's not enough of an arc. Is that from the second we see her and her team, she's immediately the one who seems to be inching towards doing darker things. She's the one who's inching towards killing people, blowing up the bank, I think it was in like episode 2 or 3. And then obviously by the time we get to this final episode, she's kind of making everyone else agree to kill everyone. And that's, whatever. The problem with that is that when Sam is making his speech at the end, or when he's trying to talk her down, either in this episode or in episode 4, is that for that to really hit home, I think, is that we have to really believe that there's a chance she can be saved. There's a chance she can be saved from going down that dark path. To save her soul, to use like a really dramatic way of putting it. And I don't think it ever really felt that there was, because from the second we met her, there was a scene in episode 3 that I remember just like almost falling asleep to, where she's at like a cemetery with like her sort of main dude, like the second in command guy with the long hair, and they're just talking about their motivations and why this needs to happen. And it just felt like it was talking for a long time without ever really giving me anything to care about or latch on to, or maybe give me some kind of sympathy. Maybe some flashbacks showing the world in the 5 years, showing how things were taken from them or how taken from other people might have helped a little bit, I'm not sure. But I think ultimately it boils down to, all she ever feels like is she's just constantly justifying what she's doing. All she ever does is say, this is why this needs to happen, and gives a generic reason that things need to change. And that's fine. But when she's questioned about why she's willing to go darker and kill people, she never really has much of a hesitation. There's one moment in that scene in episode 4 with Sam where she says that he tricked her into like saying something kind of sinister. But that's all I really remember. I never got this feeling from her other than she's just gone down this path because we have to have her be this much of a villain for the heroes to fight her towards the end. And I'm very glad that the speech from Sam did flip it around and say, no, you guys are at fault here. Like, this isn't just like a bunch of villains that we stopped, because I was feeling that a little bit in the action sequences this episode. I was worried that, I'm glad they're saving lives and whatnot, but it's kind of interesting that like the key points that these characters, these Flag Smashers, were making are actually understandable, and I kind of wanted that point to be made. So I was very happy. That's another reason why I was very happy with Sam's speech, is he pulled them up and said, no, like, what you're doing is wrong and you have to consider things differently. So that was good. But she never felt like she struggled with any of the choices she was making. We never saw her try to be better or act different, I don't think, or really feel like she was forced into this. It kind of felt like she was just always going down that path. And there is an art to maybe doing that where you always feel that sense of tragedy. But even in those cases, I want to root for the person to make the right choice. And it's kind of what they succeed with John Walker to a point where, at the end of this episode at least, because he stopped and saved those people, and because he, his reaction to the speech that Sam gives, which I think is probably the second most important reaction to it after Isaiah, is him sort of hearing what Sam is saying and being inspired by it, and sort of recognizing that he is Captain America now. But it makes me want to root for him to make the right choice, because I care about him, and I care about him not corrupting who he is, because it fundamentally would be a tragedy to see him go down a path that leads to him being a villain or whatever. With Carly, I just never felt that was ever an interest or a chance in the show. It felt like she was just destined to be exactly what she was, and it just felt very one note. Even though the issues she's fighting for and raising and bringing up are interesting in a concept level and do play into some of the great stuff at the end, her character never changes gears. It never really shifts. We have like that one character she cared about in the makeshift hospital on the episodes 3 and 4, but it wasn't enough. We needed to see her more be with the people. All we really saw was that people were willing to like hide her. We saw that people were willing to buy into what she was fighting for. We never really got a reason for us to buy into her ourselves. And instead of having that wonderful like dichotomy of actually being conflicted and actually wanting the villain to in some way succeed and have an influence, instead I was just kind of apathetic towards her, and it made all of the conflict stuff less interesting. And this episode definitely fared the best, just because again it was mostly wrapped up in action sequences that were pretty good and saving people and inspirational moments from the heroes and other moments, and because of that it diminished the problems, which is why I say if this was just a 2-hour movie, even if they didn't expand and make her and the Flag Smashers better, I would at least it would be less of a problem because it wouldn't be as dwelled upon. But because we did dwell upon it, because we spent so much time on it, and it wasn't engaging, I just never got anything out of it. So that's a shame. And unfortunately, it's just another example of the MCU having bad to mediocre to terrible villains. And I think in terms of missed opportunities, this one ranks pretty low, just because it could have been so much more, and she could have been like, I wanted to feel the tragedy. I wanted to be sad that she was dead. Like I feel like we should have felt sad that she was dead, and I didn't feel a goddamn thing. It didn't matter. Ultimately, like she's an avatar for the point she's making and for what she means to the main characters, but the trick of good writing is to make her feel more than that. And I don't think it ever succeeded in that. So, and Sam obviously gets the most superheroic moments, but obviously other characters get their chance to shine in the final too, but he gets the best and the most, as it should be. It really set him up as this inspirational figure, and his speech is extremely good, and more than any of the action, as fun as the action was, and him using these vibranium wings, rather, at least I presume they are, to shield from the explosion on the bridge, having people cheer for him, all these moments played very well. The people in the crowd naming him Captain America was maybe a little cheesy, but it's one of those things where I kind of roll with it, because ultimately they've kind of earned their superhero cheesy moment of someone saying that. So I let it go on that front, because that appeals more to my sensibilities, I guess. But so there are strengths in this show, and I do actually think it's an important piece of the overall Marvel Cinematic Universe puzzle because of what it does for Sam, and because he's presumably going to be Captain America either in another season of this show or outright just headline an Avengers movie at some point as one of the leaders. And he should, and that'll be great. And I'm excited to see that happen. But there are a lot of problems with this show. And to the point where, like, I flat out thought I hated the show for those middle 2 episodes. And then end of 4 was obviously good, but like I didn't, like, it wasn't enough to make me care at the time. But 5 and 6 really sort of brought me back, because it really focused in more on Sam's decision and his journey again. So yeah, that was my feelings. I felt like I had enough finally at the end of the show to actually sit and talk about it. I think if I tried to talk about just episode 3 and episode 4 on its own, one, everyone would have hated my review because I would have just been complaining the whole time. I would have had very little positive things to say. and I'm not really sure how much I could have really spoken about certain things in those episodes. I'm not sure how much I could have talked about them going to the cargo hold at the docks and having kind of a mediocre action scene, or goddamn Zemo dancing. And I know Twitter and social media love the dancing scene. I like all of that was just it was basically trash. Okay, it was basically trash. Everything with Zemo in this season was trash. I'm just going to say it. All right, that's me. I'm done. I guess that's a review of season 1 of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I presume it's probably going to be the only season, at least in the sense that if they do bring it back, it probably won't be called that anymore because he's Captain America now. That would be my guess. And even then, I kind of suspect this will be more of a movie thing now going forward. I could be wrong, but we'll see what they do with it. That said, it's not like the movie that this would be in is anytime soon, because like the delayed things, and we know what the next like 4 or 5 movies are, and none of them are, you know, Avengers or Captain America, so you'll see. So I didn't talk about every little plot detail. I'm not necessarily interested in talking about every plot detail, and I don't think I need to, because this is, again, just my overall things that I feel stronger about for the season. So hopefully that was interesting enough listen, and maybe hopefully I made the reasons why I liked what I liked and what I disliked clear. That sentence was weird, but you know what I'm trying to say. So inspirational, important, and genuinely super heroic at its best, and dull and boring and goddamn flag smashers at its worst. So there you go. That is my thoughts on the Falcon and Winter Soldier season 1. So thank you very much for joining me, and let me know what you thought of the season in the comments below. You can like and subscribe, of course. That helps me out a lot on YouTube and helps everything on the channel grow, so please do. That's why every YouTuber tells you to do that, because it is very important. You can also, of course, support us more directly over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month, and get some bonuses for your trouble and help keep all the content coming. So please go and have a look if you're interested, and like some continued thoughts on things and whatnot. But that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?